Adolf Hitler, a comprehensive documentary. Part 1. Early life and formative years, 1889–1913. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town on the border with Bavaria. His father, Adolf Hitler, was a customs official who had changed his surname from Schicklgruber to Hitler in 1876. Adolf was known for his authoritarian temperament and strict discipline. Hitler's mother, Clara Perlzel, was Adolf's third wife and significantly younger than him. She was a devoted, affectionate mother who doted on young Adolf. Hitler's childhood was marked by conflict with his domineering father. Adolf had risen from peasant origins to achieve a respectable civil service position, and he expected his son to follow a similar path in the bureaucracy. However, young Adolf harbored dreams of becoming an artist. This fundamental disagreement created lasting tension in the household. Hitler had several siblings, though only he and his younger sister Paula survived to adulthood. The death of his younger brother Edmund in 1900 affected Adolf deeply, making him withdrawn and detached. At school, Hitler showed early promise but became increasingly rebellious and disengaged as he grew older. He attended the Realschule in Linz, where he performed poorly in most subjects except drawing and gymnastics. His school records reveal a student who was lazy, temperamental, and unwilling to conform. Hitler himself later romanticized these years, claiming he was already developing his nationalist and pan-German views while in school. He was particularly influenced by one teacher, Dr. Leopold Putsch, who taught history with a strong German nationalist slant. When Adolf Hitler died suddenly in 1903, Adolf was 13 years old. Without his father's strict oversight, the young Hitler became even more undisciplined. He convinced his mother to allow him to leave school in 1905 without graduating. For the next 2 years, he lived a bohemian existence in Linz, imagining himself an artist and intellectual, attending the opera and theater, reading extensively, and dreaming of future glory. He became obsessed with the operas of Richard Wagner, whose mythic Germanic themes and grandiose music would influence him throughout his life. In 1907, at age 18, Hitler moved to Vienna to pursue his dream of becoming an artist. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts but was rejected. The rejection came as a devastating blow to his self-image. He applied again the following year and was rejected once more, not even being admitted to the examination. The Academy's assessment was that his sample drawings showed a lack of talent for artistic painting, though he might have some ability in architecture. This period in Vienna, from 1908 to 1913, was perhaps the most formative in Hitler's ideological development. His beloved mother Clara died of breast cancer in December 1907, leaving him emotionally adrift and without financial support. He soon exhausted his inheritance and orphan's pension, eventually becoming homeless and living in men's hostels. He survived by painting postcards and advertisements, doing odd jobs, and occasionally receiving charity. Vienna at this time was a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic imperial capital, the heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was also a hotbed of radical political movements, both on the left and right. The city had a large Jewish population, and anti-Semitism was prevalent in certain political circles. Hitler absorbed the political atmosphere like a sponge. He spent his days reading newspapers in cafes, attending political meetings, and developing his worldview. The most significant influence on Hitler in Vienna was the anti-Semitic movement led by politicians like Georg von Schirnerer and Karl Lueger. Lueger, who served as mayor of Vienna, combined populist appeal with virulent anti-Semitism, though his anti-Semitism was more political opportunism than ideological conviction. Hitler studied Lueger's techniques of mass mobilization and propaganda. From Schirnerer, he absorbed a more radical, racial form of anti-Semitism combined with pan-German nationalism that rejected the multi-ethnic Habsburg state. Hitler's own account in Mein Kampf claims he became a convinced anti-Semite during this Vienna period. though historians debate the exact timeline of his ideological development. What is clear is that Vienna exposed him to social Darwinist theories, racial pseudoscience, and pan-German nationalism. He developed an obsession with racial purity and began to see history as a struggle between races. He also developed his hatred of Marxism, democracy, and parliamentary politics, which he associated with the corruption and weakness of the Habsburg system. Despite his later claims of poverty and hardship, Hitler was not entirely destitute during these years. He received regular financial support from relatives and his orphan's pension. However, he did experience periods of genuine homelessness and lived in men's hostels. These experiences left him with a deep resentment of society and a conviction that he was destined for greater things than his current circumstances suggested. Part 2. World War I and Political Awakening, 1914–1919. In May 1913, Hitler left Vienna for Munich, partly to escape Austrian military service. He preferred Germany to Austria, which he viewed as a mongrel state corrupted by Slavic and Jewish influences. In Munich, he continued his marginal existence as a painter and drifter. When war broke out in August 1914, Hitler was caught up in the patriotic enthusiasm that swept across Europe. He immediately petitioned King Ludwig III of Bavaria for permission to serve in a Bavarian regiment despite being an Austrian citizen. Hitler's war service would become central to his political identity. He served in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Regiment, primarily as a dispatch runner carrying messages between headquarters and the front lines. This was dangerous work, though perhaps not as dangerous as frontline infantry service. Hitler proved to be a capable and courageous soldier. He was promoted to corporal and received several decorations, including the Iron Cross Second Class in 1914 and the Iron Cross First Class in 1918, the latter being a rare honor for a soldier of his rank. Fellow soldiers remembered Hitler as odd and solitary. He didn't participate in the usual soldiers' activities, didn't receive packages from home, rarely spoke of family, and spent his free time reading, drawing, or delivering political monologues to anyone who would listen. He was completely devoted to the army and the war effort, finding in military service a purpose and belonging he had never experienced before. The army was his home, and he had no desire for leave or return to civilian life. Hitler was wounded twice during the war. In October 1916, he was wounded in the leg by a shell fragment and spent 2 months recovering in Germany. In October 1918, he was temporarily blinded by a British gas attack and was in a hospital in Pomerania when Germany surrendered. Hitler's own account claims he was blinded when news of the armistice reached him, experiencing a hysterical reaction to Germany's defeat. While the exact circumstances are disputed, there is no doubt the defeat traumatized him deeply. Like many German veterans, Hitler could not accept that Germany had been defeated militarily. The German army had not been overrun. The Western Front was still on foreign soil when the armistice was signed. This gave rise to the stab-in-the-back legend, the myth that Germany had been betrayed by civilians, particularly Jews, socialists, and war profiteers, while the army remained undefeated in the field. Hitler became a fanatical adherent of this legend, which shaped his entire worldview. The war's end plunged Germany into chaos. The Kaiser abdicated, a republic was proclaimed, and revolution seemed imminent. In Bavaria, a Soviet-style republic was briefly established in April 1919 before being violently suppressed by Freikorps paramilitaries. Hitler remained in the army during this turbulent period. His unit came under the control of socialist soldiers' councils, but he managed to navigate these dangerous waters without committing himself to any side. After the suppression of the Bavarian Soviet Republic, the army began investigating soldiers' political reliability. Somehow, Hitler impressed his superiors with his anti-Bolshevik views. In an ironic twist, this former Vienna drifter was assigned to a propaganda unit tasked with indoctrinating returning prisoners of war with nationalist and anti-communist ideas. Hitler discovered he had a talent for public speaking. For the first time in his life, he found something he excelled at beyond his military service. In September 1919, Hitler was ordered to investigate a small political group called the German Workers' Party. This tiny organization, founded by Anton Drexler, combined nationalism with an appeal to workers, attempting to draw them away from socialism and Marxism. Hitler attended a meeting, and during the discussion, he delivered an impromptu speech that impressed Drexler. He was invited to join the party's executive committee. Hitler hesitated briefly but then accepted. He had found his calling. Part 3. Rise of the Nazi Party, 1920–1923. Hitler threw himself into party work with characteristic intensity. The German Workers' Party was tiny, with only a few dozen members meeting in Munich beer halls, but Hitler saw potential. He pushed for a larger public profile, better propaganda, and more aggressive recruiting. His powerful speaking ability quickly made him the party's main attraction. By early 1920, he had become the party's chief propagandist and most popular speaker. In February 1920, the party announced its 25-point program, which Hitler helped draft. This platform combined German nationalism, anti-Semitism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Marxism into a confused but emotionally powerful mixture. It called for the union of all Germans, the revocation of the Versailles Treaty, citizenship restricted to those of German blood, and the removal of Jews from positions of influence. The party also changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazi for short. Hitler developed a sophisticated understanding of propaganda and mass psychology. He realized that effective propaganda must be simple, emotional, and repetitive. It must appeal to feelings rather than intellect, focus on a few key points, and identify clear enemies. His speeches followed this formula, hammering away at the November criminals who had betrayed Germany, the oppression of the Versailles Treaty, and the Jewish Marxist conspiracy he claimed threatened German existence. The early Nazi Party attracted a motley collection of malcontents, veterans, Völkisch ideologues, and social outcasts. Hitler forged this disparate group into an increasingly disciplined organization. In 1921, when party leaders tried to merge with other groups and dilute his control, Hitler threatened to resign. Recognizing that he was their main asset, the party capitulated completely. Hitler became chairman with virtually unlimited powers. At 32, the former Vienna drifter had become the undisputed leader of a growing political movement. Hitler created the SA, or Sturmabteilung, stormtroopers who wore brown shirts and provided security at Nazi meetings while disrupting those of opponents. These paramilitary forces attracted young men brutalized by war, unable to adjust to civilian life, and eager for continued combat. Under Ernst Röhm, the SA grew into a formidable street-fighting force. Nazi meetings became theatrical spectacles featuring flags, uniforms, military music, and Hitler's increasingly powerful oratory. By 1923, the Nazi Party had grown to thousands of members and was one of several radical right-wing movements in Bavaria. The Weimar Republic was in crisis. France had occupied the Ruhr in January 1923 when Germany defaulted on reparations payments. The German government responded with passive resistance, leading to economic collapse and hyperinflation. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. The middle class saw their savings evaporate, creating massive resentment against the democratic government. Hitler decided the time was ripe for revolution. Inspired by Mussolini's march on Rome in 1922, he planned to seize power in Bavaria and then march on Berlin. On November 8, 1923, he launched the Beer Hall Putsch. Hitler and his followers, including World War I hero General Ludendorff, burst into a Munich beer hall where Bavarian leaders were meeting. Hitler fired a pistol into the ceiling and proclaimed the revolution had begun. The putsch was poorly planned and quickly collapsed. The next day, when Hitler led a march of about 2,000 supporters through Munich, police opened fire. 16 Nazis and 4 police officers were killed. Hitler fled but was arrested 2 days later. The Nazi Party was banned, and its leader faced trial for treason. It appeared Hitler's political career had ended in complete failure. Many observers expected he would be forgotten within months. Part 4. Mein Kampf and the Wilderness Years, 1924–1929. Hitler's trial for treason in February and March 1924 transformed his failure into propaganda victory. The judges were sympathetic to right-wing defendants, and Hitler was allowed to turn the proceedings into a political platform. He delivered lengthy speeches defending his actions and attacking the Weimar Republic. Rather than showing contrition, he proclaimed his patriotic motives and predicted future vindication. The trial received massive press coverage, making Hitler a national figure for the first time. He was sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, but served only 9 months in comfortable conditions. His cell was spacious. He could receive visitors freely, and supporters sent him gifts and food. Hitler used this time to write Mein Kampf, his political autobiography and ideological manifesto. He dictated much of it to Rudolf Hess, a devoted follower who had participated in the putsch and shared Hitler's imprisonment. Mein Kampf is a rambling, repetitive work combining autobiography, political analysis, and ideological rant. Its prose is often turgid, and its logic questionable, yet it laid out Hitler's worldview with brutal clarity. Those who later claimed they didn't know what Hitler stood for had not read his book, where he explained his intentions with disturbing frankness. The book's core thesis is that history is a racial struggle for survival. Hitler divided humanity into races, with the Aryan race being the creator of all civilization and culture. He portrayed Jews not as a religious group, but as a parasitic race that could not create culture but only destroyed it. According to Hitler, Jews were engaged in an international conspiracy to dominate the world through both capitalism and communism, which he claimed were two sides of the same Jewish conspiracy. Hitler called for Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. He argued that Germany needed to expand eastward, conquering territory in Russia and Eastern Europe. This expansion would provide agricultural land and resources, making Germany self-sufficient and immune to blockade. The Slavic inhabitants would be enslaved or eliminated, and the land would be colonized by German settlers. This genocidal vision was presented as a biological necessity. The book also outlined Hitler's political strategy. He had learned from the putsch that power must be achieved legally, at least in appearance. The Nazis would use democratic mechanisms to destroy democracy from within. Once in power, they would eliminate all opposition and establish a totalitarian state. Hitler showed contempt for the masses, believing they could be manipulated through propaganda, and called for dictatorial leadership embodying the national will. Mein Kampf sold poorly at first. It was overpriced, poorly written, and seemed the delusional rant of a failed putschist. However, it became required reading for Nazi members, and as the party grew, sales increased dramatically. By 1933, it had sold over 1 million copies, making Hitler wealthy. Foreign observers who dismissed Hitler as a clown might have taken him more seriously had they actually read his explicit blueprint for war and genocide. Released from prison in December 1924, Hitler faced a changed political landscape. The economy had stabilized, the hyperinflation had been controlled, and the Weimar Republic enjoyed relative prosperity. The conditions that had fueled extremism in 1923 had temporarily vanished. The Nazi Party was still banned in Bavaria, and the Völkisch movement had splintered into competing factions during Hitler's imprisonment. Hitler had to rebuild from scratch. The ban on the Nazi Party was lifted in February 1925, and Hitler promised authorities he would pursue power only through legal means. He refounded the party and reasserted his absolute control, purging rivals and demanding total loyalty. However, the party struggled during these wilderness years of 1925 to 1929. In the 1928 Reichstag elections, the Nazis won only 2.6% of the vote and 12 seats out of 491 during this period. Hitler refined the party structure, and developed the tactics that would later bring success. He established the Hitler Youth, the SS, as an elite guard, and created a national party organization with local branches throughout Germany. He also cultivated relationships with wealthy industrialists and conservative elites, presenting himself as a bulwark against communism. His speaking skills continued to develop, and he pioneered the use of aircraft to campaign across Germany, a novel tactic that increased his reach and mystique. Hitler also secured his position within the party against all rivals. Gregor Strasser led a faction emphasizing the socialist elements of National Socialism and wanting to ally with the Soviet Union against Western capitalism. Hitler decisively defeated this tendency at the Bamberg Conference in 1926, establishing that he alone determined party policy. He also faced down challenges from the SA leadership, ensuring the party's paramilitaries served political goals rather than pursuing their own revolutionary agenda. Part 5. The Seizure of Power 1930–1933. The Great Depression transformed German politics and Hitler's fortunes. When the American stock market crashed in October 1929, it triggered a global economic collapse that hit Germany particularly hard. Germany depended on American loans to pay reparations and finance recovery. When these loans were recalled and international trade collapsed, the German economy imploded. By 1932, over 6 million Germans were unemployed, representing about one-third of the workforce. The Depression radicalized German politics. The moderate center parties hemorrhaged support as desperate citizens turned to extremist alternatives. The Communist Party grew dramatically, terrifying middle-class and conservative Germans with the prospect of Bolshevik revolution. The Nazi Party positioned itself as the most effective bulwark against communism, while also appealing to those ruined by economic catastrophe. In the September 1930 Reichstag elections, the Nazis achieved a stunning breakthrough, winning 18.3% of the vote and 107 seats, making them the second largest party. Hitler had become a major political force. His message resonated with multiple constituencies. Farmers hurt by falling agricultural prices, small business owners facing bankruptcy, unemployed workers betrayed by traditional parties, veterans resentful of Germany's humiliation, and young people who had never known prosperity or stability. Hitler's appeal was his promise to transcend traditional class divisions and create a unified national community. Unlike the communists who appealed only to workers or conservatives who represented only elites, Hitler claimed to speak for all Germans. His rhetoric skillfully combined different appeals for different audiences while maintaining core themes: hatred of the Versailles Treaty, anti-Semitism, anti-Marxism, and the promise of national renewal under strong leadership. The Nazi propaganda machine, directed by Joseph Goebbels, became increasingly sophisticated. They plastered cities with posters, distributed millions of pamphlets, and organized massive rallies. Hitler traveled by airplane across Germany, sometimes speaking in multiple cities in one day. These rallies were carefully choreographed spectacles featuring flags, music, marching formations, and Hitler's mesmerizing oratory. People came not just for political content, but for emotional experience and sense of belonging. Violence also escalated dramatically. The SA engaged in street battles with communist paramilitaries, and political murders became common. Hitler deliberately promoted this chaos, arguing that only the Nazis could restore order. The violence intimidated opponents while demonstrating Nazi strength and determination. The Weimar Republic's authorities seemed powerless to control the disorder, reinforcing the perception that democratic government had failed. In the presidential election of 1932, Hitler challenged the incumbent Paul von Hindenburg, the aging World War I hero. Hitler lost but won 36.8% in the runoff, a remarkable showing. In July 1932 Reichstag elections, the Nazis won 37.3% and 230 seats, becoming the largest party. However, they still lacked a majority, and Hitler refused to join a coalition unless he became chancellor. The political situation became a chess game between Hitler and the conservative elites who controlled access to power. Chancellor Franz von Papen and others believed they could use Hitler, appointing him chancellor in a coalition government where they would control him. They assumed his lack of administrative experience and their own expertise would let them manipulate him. This catastrophic miscalculation stemmed from their underestimation of Hitler's ruthlessness and political skill. In November 1932 elections, Nazi support actually declined to 33.1%, suggesting their momentum had stalled. The party faced financial crisis and internal dissension. Some historians argue that Hitler's appointment as chancellor was not inevitable, that the Nazi wave might have broken. However, conservative elites feared continuing chaos and communist growth more than they feared Hitler. On January 30, 1933, President Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Hitler had achieved power legally, through constitutional means, though through a process of political manipulation, intimidation, and the catastrophic misjudgment of conservative elites who thought they could control him. Hitler arrived at the chancellery and told his followers, "No power on earth will get me out of here alive." Part 6. Consolidation of Dictatorship, 1933–1934. Hitler moved with stunning speed to consolidate absolute power. His cabinet contained only 3 Nazis among 12 members, leading conservatives to believe they had contained him. They were wrong. Within months, Hitler had destroyed German democracy and established a totalitarian dictatorship. His methods combined legal manipulation, intimidation, violence, and the exploitation of a crisis he himself created. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building burned. A Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe was arrested at the scene. Whether van der Lubbe acted alone or the Nazis themselves set the fire remains debated, but Hitler immediately exploited the incident. He convinced Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed detention without trial. This decree, never repealed, became the legal foundation for Nazi terror. Using emergency powers, Hitler arrested thousands of communists and socialists, eliminating his left-wing opposition before the March 5 elections. Despite massive intimidation and the suppression of opposition parties, the Nazis won only 43.9% of the vote. Combined with their conservative allies, they had a narrow majority, but Hitler wanted more. He wanted legal dictatorship. On March 23, 1933, the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, which allowed Hitler's government to pass laws without parliamentary approval. This act essentially transferred legislative power from the Reichstag to Hitler's cabinet. It required a 2/3 majority, which Hitler achieved through a combination of communist delegates being arrested, Catholic Center Party support secured through false promises, and SA intimidation of remaining delegates. With the Enabling Act, Hitler had legal dictatorship. He systematically eliminated all potential centers of opposition. Trade unions were abolished in May 1933 and replaced with a Nazi-controlled labor front. Political parties were banned or dissolved themselves under pressure. By July 1933, the Nazi Party was the only legal party in Germany. The federal states were stripped of power and brought under central control through Nazi governors. The process was called Gleichschaltung, or coordination, where all aspects of society were brought under Nazi control. Professional organizations, cultural institutions, universities, and civic groups were either Nazified or dissolved. Jews were systematically removed from civil service, universities, and professions. Book burnings in May 1933 symbolically destroyed un-German literature. Germany was being transformed into a one-party totalitarian state with breathtaking speed. However, Hitler still faced potential challenges. The SA, now numbering over 2 million men, was becoming a problem. SA leader Ernst Röhm wanted a second revolution that would displace the traditional army and transform society more radically. The army and conservative elites who had helped Hitler to power were alarmed. Hitler needed the army's support and feared Röhm's ambitions threatened his own position. On the night of the Long Knives, June 30–July 2, 1934, Hitler struck. SS and Gestapo units arrested and executed SA leaders, including Röhm. The purge also eliminated other potential opponents, including former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher and conservative figures who had opposed Hitler. Estimates of those killed range from 85 to over 200. Hitler justified the massacre by claiming he was suppressing a treasonous plot, and the army and conservatives breathed easier, failing to recognize they had witnessed the true nature of Hitler's regime. When President Hindenburg died on August 2, 1934, Hitler merged the offices of President and Chancellor, becoming Führer and Reich Chancellor. The army was required to swear a personal oath of loyalty not to the Constitution or Germany, but to Adolf Hitler personally. This oath would bind officers' consciences and make military resistance to Hitler extremely difficult. At age 45, the former Vienna vagrant had become absolute dictator of Germany. Part 7. The Third Reich and Road to War, 1935–1939. With absolute power secured domestically, Hitler turned to foreign policy. His goals were the complete reversal of the Versailles Treaty, German rearmament, territorial expansion, and ultimately the war for Lebensraum in the East outlined in Mein Kampf. He proceeded cautiously at first, testing Western resolve and exploiting divisions between Britain and France. In 1935, Hitler announced Germany would rearm in violation of Versailles. The Western powers protested but took no action. Encouraged, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland in March 1936, marching troops into territory that was supposed to remain demilitarized. This was an enormous gamble. German forces had orders to withdraw if France responded militarily. France did nothing, partially because of Britain's unwillingness to act. Hitler had called their bluff. These successes enhanced Hitler's prestige domestically and his confidence in his own judgment. He increasingly ignored cautious advice from professional diplomats and military officers, trusting instead in his intuition and willingness to take risks. His gambles had succeeded where conventional wisdom predicted failure, reinforcing his belief in his own genius and destiny. Nazi Germany in the mid-1930s presented contradictory faces to the world. For many Germans, these were good years. Unemployment fell dramatically through massive public works projects like the Autobahn, rearmament spending, and statistical manipulation. The regime promoted a sense of national revival and unity. The 1936 Berlin Olympics showcased a modern, peaceful Germany to the world, while behind the scenes, persecution of Jews and political opponents intensified. The regime's anti-Semitic persecution escalated systematically. The 1935 Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship and prohibited marriage or sexual relations between Jews and Aryans. Jews were progressively excluded from economic life, professions, and public spaces. Propaganda relentlessly dehumanized them, preparing the population for more radical measures. Many Jews emigrated, though Nazi policy made this increasingly difficult. In 1938, Hitler accelerated his expansionist plans. In March, he forced the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, which was accomplished without firing a shot. Austria's independent existence ended, and it became part of Greater Germany. The Western powers again did nothing beyond protests. Hundreds of thousands of Austrians enthusiastically welcomed the Anschluss, while Austrian Jews faced immediate persecution. Hitler next targeted Czechoslovakia, claiming the German-speaking Sudetenland must be incorporated into Germany. He manufactured a crisis, threatening war if his demands were not met. In September 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Premier Édouard Daladier met Hitler in Munich and agreed to the Sudetenland's transfer to Germany. Czechoslovakia was not consulted. Chamberlain returned to Britain claiming peace in our time. Munich Agreement represented the high point of appeasement, the policy of satisfying Hitler's demands to avoid war. Its defenders argued it bought time for Britain and France to rearm, and that their publics were not ready for war. Critics argued it encouraged Hitler's aggression, betrayed Czechoslovakia, and missed the last good opportunity to stop Hitler when Germany was still relatively weak militarily. Hitler quickly proved appeasement's critics correct. In March 1939, he seized the remainder of Czechoslovakia, violating the Munich Agreement and making clear his word was worthless. This finally convinced British and French leaders that Hitler could not be appeased. When Hitler next demanded Danzig and territories from Poland, Britain and France guaranteed Poland's independence, drawing a line they would not allow Hitler to cross. Hitler did not believe Britain and France would actually fight for Poland. He secured a stunning diplomatic coup with the Nazi-Soviet Pact in August 1939, a non-aggression treaty with his ideological archenemy Stalin. The pact included secret protocols dividing Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. With his eastern flank secure, Hitler ordered the invasion of Poland. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland using blitzkrieg tactics, rapid, coordinated attacks by tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry that overwhelmed Polish defenses. Britain and France declared war on September 3, though they could do little to help Poland directly. The Second World War had begun. Poland was crushed within weeks, divided between Germany and the Soviet Union per the secret Nazi-Soviet agreement. Part 8. World War and the Holocaust, 1940–1942. Hitler had started the war he had always intended, though earlier than his generals advised. The conflict would expand into a global catastrophe that would kill over 60 million people and end with Germany's complete destruction. For the first 2 years, however, Hitler's forces seemed invincible, conquering most of Europe with stunning speed. In spring 1940, Germany launched attacks on Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. The invasions of Denmark and Norway secured vital resources and strategic positions. The assault on France through the Low Countries bypassed the Maginot Line fortifications. In 6 weeks of fighting, France, which had held Germany to a stalemate for 4 years in World War I, was defeated. Hitler had accomplished what Kaiser Wilhelm had failed to achieve. The fall of France in June 1940 represented Hitler's greatest triumph. He forced France to sign the armistice in the same railroad car where Germany had surrendered in 1918, a deliberate humiliation revering that earlier defeat. Most of France was occupied, with a collaborationist government established at Vichy. Britain now stood alone against Nazi Germany. Hitler expected Britain to negotiate peace, but Prime Minister Winston Churchill refused. Hitler half-heartedly prepared for invasion, while the Luftwaffe attempted to win air superiority over Britain. The Battle of Britain in summer and fall 1940 ended in German failure. The Royal Air Force, aided by radar and code breaking, prevented German air supremacy, and the invasion was postponed indefinitely. Unable to defeat Britain, Hitler turned to his ultimate goal, the conquest of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, launched on June 22, 1941, was the largest invasion in history, over 3 million German and Axis soldiers attacking on a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Hitler believed the Soviet Union was a rotting structure that would collapse when kicked in. Initially, events seemed to confirm this. Soviet forces were caught by surprise despite numerous warnings. German armies advanced hundreds of miles in weeks, encircling and destroying entire Soviet armies. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured. By December 1941, German forces had reached the outskirts of Moscow. However, the Soviet Union did not collapse. Stalin's ruthless leadership, Soviet industrial capacity, vast territory, and harsh winter halted the German advance. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union was not merely military conquest, but a genocidal war of annihilation. Nazi ideology viewed Slavs as subhuman and communism as a Jewish conspiracy. Special SS units called Einsatzgruppen followed the German army, systematically murdering Jews, communist officials, and other designated enemies. Hundreds of thousands were shot in mass executions in the invasion's first months. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of European Jews, escalated into full industrial extermination during this period. While persecution and murder of Jews had been Nazi policy since 1933, the decision for complete genocide was made sometime in 1941. The Wannsee Conference in January 1942 coordinated the final solution, the bureaucratic plan to murder every Jew in Europe. Jews from across occupied Europe were transported to extermination camps in occupied Poland. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, and Majdanek, industrial-scale murder was implemented. Victims were killed in gas chambers disguised as showers, their bodies burned in crematoria. The process was systematized, bureaucratized, and hidden behind euphemistic language, but its purpose was clear: the complete annihilation of the Jewish people. The Holocaust was not a secret project by a few extremists, but involved thousands of participants across German society: bureaucrats who organized transportation, soldiers who guarded camps, engineers who designed gas chambers, industrialists who supplied materials, and ordinary Germans who benefited from confiscated Jewish property. While the full scale was concealed, the regime's genocidal intentions were evident to anyone willing to see. By late 1942, the war's trajectory was shifting. The German advance into the Soviet Union had stalled. The Wehrmacht was overstretched, suffering enormous casualties, and facing an enemy that, while grievously wounded, was not defeated. In North Africa, British forces defeated Germany's Afrika Korps at El Alamein. The United States, provoked into war by Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and Hitler's declaration of war, began mobilizing its vast industrial and military potential. Part 9. Downfall and Destruction, 1943–1945. The Battle of Stalingrad marked the war's turning point. From August 1942 to February 1943, German and Soviet forces fought for the city in brutal urban combat. Hitler ordered that Stalingrad must be taken, and then refused to allow German forces to retreat when they were encircled. The entire German Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was destroyed. It was Germany's first major defeat, and the psychological impact was devastating. After Stalingrad, German forces were in continuous retreat on the Eastern Front. The Soviets steadily pushed westward, retaking their territory at enormous cost. The Eastern Front consumed the bulk of German military resources. Despite Nazi propaganda about defending European civilization from Bolshevism, the reality was a brutal war of annihilation, where both sides committed massive atrocities. Though Nazi crimes exceeded even Soviet ones in their systematic genocidal character, Hitler's role as military commander became increasingly disastrous. He refused to allow retreats, leading to catastrophic encirclements. He diverted resources to marginal theaters instead of concentrating on critical fronts. He interfered with tactical decisions better left to field commanders. His generals increasingly recognized his decisions were leading to disaster, but the oath of loyalty, fear of his rages, and the SS's omnipresence prevented effective resistance. The Allied bombing campaign brought war to German cities. British and American aircraft dropped thousands of tons of bombs on German industrial centers and civilian areas. Cities like Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin were devastated by firestorms. While the bombing's effectiveness in reducing German industrial production is debated, it caused massive civilian casualties and demonstrated the Third Reich could not protect its people. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy, opening the long-awaited Second Front in Western Europe. Despite fierce German resistance, Allied forces broke out from the beachhead and began liberating France. Hitler's armies now faced attack from east and west simultaneously. Germany's strategic position was hopeless, but Hitler refused to consider surrender, instead demanding fanatical resistance. As military defeat loomed, Hitler became increasingly detached from reality. He spent much time in various headquarters, studying maps and moving non-existent armies. He refused to visit bombed cities or see the war's real effects on Germany. He blamed defeats on his generals' betrayal and the German people's weakness rather than facing his own catastrophic decisions. On July 20, 1944, a group of army officers attempted to assassinate Hitler with a bomb planted in his headquarters. The bomb exploded, but Hitler survived with minor injuries. The failed assassination led to brutal reprisals. Thousands were arrested, and about 200 people were executed, including talented officers and officials who might have helped organize Germany's surrender and transition. Hitler's survival reinforced his belief in his providential destiny. The final months of the war were characterized by pointless destruction and death. Hitler ordered a scorched earth policy in Germany itself, claiming the German people had proven themselves weak and unworthy. Teenage boys and old men were conscripted into the Volkssturm for suicidal last stands. Millions more died in fighting that could not change the war's outcome. As Soviet forces approached Berlin in April 1945, Hitler retreated to his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. In this underground complex, cut off from reality, he continued to issue orders to armies that no longer existed. He married his longtime mistress Eva Braun and dictated his final testament, which blamed the war on international Jewry and showed no recognition of his own responsibility for Germany's catastrophe. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet soldiers fought through Berlin streets above him, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. He shot himself while simultaneously biting a cyanide capsule. Eva Braun took poison. Their bodies were carried outside, doused with gasoline, and burned in a shell crater, a pathetic end for the man who had dreamed of eternal glory. Germany surrendered unconditionally a week later. The Third Reich, which Hitler had boasted would last 1,000 years, had lasted 12. The war Hitler started killed over 60 million people. The Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others the Nazis deemed unworthy of life. Entire cities lay in ruins. Germany was occupied, divided, and would remain so for decades. Europe's centuries-long dominance of global affairs was ended. The political map was redrawn, creating tensions that would define the Cold War. The atomic age began with weapons developed to defeat the Axis powers. Sources and references. Part 1-2, Kershaw, Ian. Hitler, 1889-1936 Hubris. W. W. Norton and Company, 1999. Pages 3156 covering early life and WWI Fest, Joachim, Hitler. Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, 1974. Pages 3298 Vienna Years Hammond Bridget, Hitler's Vienna, A Portrait of the Tyrant as a Young Man. Taurus Park Paperbacks, 2010. Pages 15-347, Weber Thomas. Hitler's First War. Oxford University Press, 2010. Pages 12-264, Part 3-4 Kershaw, Ian, Hitler, 1889-1936 Hubris. Pages 157-304 Early Nazi Party Scherer, William L. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Simon and Schuster, 1960. Pages 43-112 Hitler Adolf. Mein Kampf. Translated by Ralph Mannheim, Houghton Mifflin, 1943. Complete text analysis. Fest, Joachim, Hitler. Pages 189-67 Landsberg and Rebuilding Part 5-6 Kershaw, Ian, Hitler, 1889-1936 Hubris. Pages 305-588 Seizure of Power Evans, Richard J. The Coming of the Third Reich. Penguin Press, 2004. Pages 256-441 Scherer, William L. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Pages 136-30 Consolidation Period Fest, Joachim, Hitler. Pages 268-402 Part 7 Kershaw, Ian, Hitler, 1936-1945 Nemesis. W. W. Norton and Company, 2000. Pages 3-89 Pre-War Expansion Evans, Richard J. The Third Reich in Power. Penguin Press, 2005. Pages 619-746 Scherer, William L. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Pages 274–539, Road to War, Part 89, Kershaw, Ian. Hitler, 1936–19 for 5 Nemesis. Pages 298–41, War and Downfall, Evans, Richard J. The Third Reich at War. Penguin Press, 2009. Complete volume, pages 1–950, Beaver, Anthony. The Second World War. Little, Brown and Company, 2012. Pages 1–863, Shirer, William L. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Pages 540–1143, Kershaw, Ian. The End. The Defiance and Destruction of Hitler's Germany, 1944–1945. Penguin Press, 2011. Pages 1–489, Friedlander, Saul. Nazi Germany and the Jews, 1930–91945. The Years of Extermination. HarperCollins, 2007. Pages 1790.